Yeah, so one of each. So one was like swapping in like kind of new people within the retainer relationship, like kind of like removing some people that didn't have like build-oriented skill sets and like kind of adding in people that did, like just like kind of a budget neutral scenario that we had to like kind of get the buy-off and the clients of. You can't just start wheeling people in and out like just in existing contracts. But then just like for the other ones, it was like new work that came in, just like this was like the contract model that we put in place. And for those, like it was a little bit easier. Just, there's obviously relationships, particularly within the mid-level, like just of client organizations that some clients get, very uncomfortable just like for, removing people that they've been working with for some time. But at the same time, like the way that we looked at this, and it was like, pretty clinical, like investing in relationships, like, we looked at as being like kind of, in the mid to long term, fleeting, like turnover within client marketing organizations, just like happens with great frequency. And just like, we had gotten burned a couple of times where, we'd built great relationships with CMOs, the CMOs leave, and suddenly just like our work's not so good, the new person comes in, just like they could give a crap, like, just like what the relationship was, with their predecessor, and we lost two very large, like, kind of pieces of business, like, just as a result of that. Like, so, like, it was that, like, kind of act that pushed us, like, into this direction where we as an agency have to take more responsibility, like, for the work that we provide, even if that means, like, kind of, like taking a risk in terms of how we structure the accounts.
I have a question. So I think in the traditional account service world, account service people would also claim to be sort of the owners of the knowledge of their client's business.
Mm-hmm.
So in this new role, did that burden also shift down to the workers, the producers?
It did, yeah, and just like the producers became like kind of these very it was a difficult position to recruit for. I mean, like finding somebody with the organizational and technical skills to be able to run a project and manage a team, but also like kind of with the intellect and soft skills to be able to understand a client's business and also know when like you should have a conversation and when you should probably wait to have that conversation. But you can find them. Like what it did mean, like for me, is just like you put somebody in, they're not working out. Like you got to go in there and pull them out, like because it is a very like kind of sensitive, like almost like fulcrum-y position. But what I found is just like the people that were effective like in that position just like kind of like got to know the client's business quite well, because a lot of the products that we were building were utilities that kind of plugged into different parts of the organization. It was less about banner ads and now about like kind of making things that like kind of drew data like out of systems that were customer databases, and like they very suddenly were exposed to like kind of like information that like previously we weren't even getting a look at. Like we started to go further into client IT groups. I mean, just like the relationships began to broaden because the skill sets of the people that we were using to engage the client like kind of changed markedly. And again, like some of the best producers we had were account people. Like, I mean, just like, people that like kind of took it upon themselves to kind of learn a little bit about client-side programming. This stuff is really accessible. I'm like kind of an ex-account person that went into production. I mean, just like they're very like kind of transferable skill sets. But again, like from my point of view, just like kind of looking at the downward pressures like on margins and like kind of the pressure to create more like kind of work, and that work being increasingly sophisticated. Like the reason I kind of got out of account management is because I felt that like I was going to like have more opportunity just like if I got a lot better at making things. And like I'm not advocating that for everyone, but just like for me, that was a decision that I spent some time considering and then acted upon. Another like kind of just idea that we put into place, and this is something that like kind of I worked with Scott Prindle on when I was at RGA, like kind of managing the Nike business, is getting away from like kind of organizations that had like kind of many layers and just like like kind of middle layers and low level layers and support layers and then just kind of executive layers. What we started doing is just like kind of organizing around cross-disciplinary teams. So we'd have a management team that was in place, and just like myself, like Scott, like who ran the technology group, like just like the creative director, the UX person, we all sat together just like at 4 desks like that were joined. There was no walls or cubes. Like we were part of an integrated like cross-disciplinary leadership team, And then we had about like kind of, like 5 groups that were kind of set up in the same way. And they were project teams that worked like autonomously. And what would happen is like work would be defined, and then work would get pushed into a product group, and the product group would just start building. And just like the idea of a product group, I think is like kind of channel neutral. Like, I mean, just like that can be a film, like it can be an event, it can be just like kind of a complicated like print piece. Like it can also be just like a very like kind of complex application or digital platform. But the idea of just like kind of like deconstructing work into just like projects, assigning those projects to cross-disciplinary teams, and letting those teams like kind of succeed or fail, just like with some level of autonomy, I think just allows for like work to take place like much more quickly, because like you're investing very little like in the act of like kind of running work like kind of up and down like the process. And then also like kind of within some agency structures, just like there's people that are involved in just like kind of muling that work to different like like kind of routing it within the agency and trying to find people to show stuff. I mean, just and like we kind of took those jobs and then reinvested them again, like kind of back into like people that knew how to make things. Like, so just, I mean, we got pretty dogmatic just about like kind of every resource we had just like should be like kind of capable of contributing to the act of making something. And again, like, there was some bumpiness to it. Like there's problems that you accept as you like kind of move to that model. A team goes rogue, like communication isn't as good. But I mean, just like you balance off like kind of, just like those outlier like kind of negative experiences with an overwhelmingly positive, like, I mean, generating a huge volume of work. Like some of the work that came out of this team structure continues to be like kind of the work that I'm most proud of like in my career. And it's like, you don't not do something like that because you can like invent like ideas for what that might not do well. It's like you put it in place, like you try it, and then you start tinkering with it. But I mean, just like kind of accepting a model like the one on the left just because like you can talk yourself into finding problems with the one on the right. For me, just like you're never going to do anything. I mean, just like if you believe that things are changing, and that as managers and leaders, we have an obligation to like kind of like work out new responses to that change, then we have to try things. And just like, maybe that works for some people, maybe it doesn't work for others. But I would say the idea of flattening and like just like, creating more autonomy and cross-disciplinary groups that sit together is something that I've seen a lot of success with. Questions about that, or just like...
In terms of, how do you go about sourcing and vetting the skill sets involved? I feel like one of the challenges...
It's a great question.
...that people like their titles change. Like, oh,
yeah.
Alex, here's your new social media guy. But
yeah.
Yesterday you knew nothing about it.
Yeah, no, and that's it. And just from my job there, and just like the jobs I've had like subsequently, like my greatest like responsibility in some respects is recruiting, and then also like kind of like fixing mistakes, which is like kind of a nicer way of saying like kind of managing out people that can't do the work. Because it breaks down like if you don't have like kind of high functioning groups, and that's not being mercenary. The minute somebody like kind of messes up, you can them like kind of in some like public shameful way. But if somebody's miscast, like or if somebody like doesn't have an attitude and just like or they've got an attitude and it's affecting like kind of the relationship in the larger group, like it's your responsibility as a manager to get in there and fix that. Like, I mean, I think the best thing that we did was like not getting in there and like kind of moving stuff around for people and telling them how to do the work. It was like kind of providing support for the teams and making sure that they function well. So, grabbing some jackass that like kind of somehow makes their way through the interview process as a social media person, like finding that that they don't know anything about it. It's like, you either tell them like, hey, you got a few weeks to like kind of really improve like your contributions, or you got to manage them out. Because like like bad apples can really cripple like a team if you're focused on like creating these like kind of high functioning like very fast moving teams. But that's a very great question. Yeah.
Just a little weedy question.
Yeah.
As far as teams, are you talking dedicated teams like project teams or teams that handle multiple projects at the same time?
Ideally, it's dedicated project teams, and this is something that, like, kind of frankly, like struggling with at the place I'm working now. Like, where a lot of the contracts are set up just like where